I found the crack in my driveway on a Tuesday morning, and it probably saved everyone's lives. The fissure was small, maybe an inch wide, running diagonally across the concrete like someone had drawn it with a ruler. I'd been watering my roses when I noticed it, and something about the precision of that line made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. After 30 years of fieldwork studying geological formations across California, Nevada, and Arizona, I'd developed instincts about these things. This was not normal settling. This was something else entirely. My name is Arthur Nichols, and I had retired to Meadowbrook Estates in San Bernardino County 3 years ago with the promise of peaceful golden years. The development was relatively new, built in 2019, and consisted of 240 homes arranged in neat rows along streets named after trees that did not grow naturally in this climate: Elm Drive, Maple Court, Birch Lane. I lived on Oak Circle, house number 47, in a beige stucco structure that looked identical to every other house on my street, except for the color of the shutters. The HOA here was legendary for all the wrong reasons. The Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association was run by a board of 5 people who seemed to believe they wielded the power of minor deities. At the helm was Brenda Patterson, a 52-year-old woman with shoulder-length blonde hair that she always wore in the same rigid style, as if she had found a picture in a magazine in 1995 and decided that was her look forever. She wore pearls, even to board meetings held in the community center, and she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you had disappointed her personally just by existing. I had already had 3 run-ins with Brenda in my time here. The first was over the color of my front door. I had painted it a sage green, thinking it was a nice, subdued choice. Within 48 hours, I received a violation notice stating that only colors from the approved palette were permitted, and sage green was not on that list. The approved greens were forest green, hunter green, and something called colonial green that looked suspiciously like forest green to me. I repainted it hunter green. Cost me $300. The second incident involved my mailbox. I had replaced the standard black mailbox with one that had a little solar light on top so I could see my house numbers at night. Apparently, this was a modification that required written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I had not sought such approval. Violation notice arrived. I removed the mailbox and reinstalled the old one. The third time was about my yard. I had let the grass grow to about 4 inches tall because I was out of town visiting my daughter in Oregon for 2 weeks. The HOA rules stated grass must not exceed 3 inches in height. I came home to find not 1 but 3 violation notices on my door, along with a threat that if I did not remedy the situation within 72 hours, the HOA would hire a landscaping company to mow my lawn and bill me for it at a premium rate. I mowed the lawn that same evening, so I was not exactly on friendly terms with the board when I noticed the crack. But the crack bothered me. It bothered me enough that I spent the rest of that Tuesday walking around the neighborhood, looking at other driveways, other sidewalks, other foundations. And I found more cracks. Not everywhere, but in a pattern. Houses on the western side of the development showed stress fractures, small ones mostly, but they were there. Foundation cracks, driveway splits. One house on Willow Lane had a gap between the garage door and the frame that you could stick your finger through. By Wednesday morning, I'd pulled out my old equipment from the garage. I had not touched my seismograph in 3 years, but it still worked. I set it up in my backyard and let it run for 24 hours. What I saw in the readings made my blood run cold. There was microseismic activity beneath Meadowbrook Estates, small tremors, barely perceptible to humans, but constant. The kind of activity that suggested movement along a fault line, and not just any fault line. When I cross-referenced the readings with geological survey maps of San Bernardino County, I realized with dawning horror that this development had been built directly on top of a previously unmapped branch of the San Andreas fault system. The San Andreas is not a single fault. It is a complex system of interconnected fault lines stretching over 800 miles through California. New branches and connections were still being discovered, and apparently there was one running directly beneath our perfectly manicured lawns and beige stucco houses. I knew I had to report this, But to whom? The HOA seemed like the logical first step, even though the thought of dealing with Brenda Patterson made me want to crawl back into bed and pretend I had never noticed anything. But this was not about petty rule enforcement. This was about safety, about potentially saving lives. Thursday afternoon, I called the HOA office and asked to be placed on the agenda for the next board meeting. The secretary, a tired-sounding woman named Gloria, told me the next meeting was not until the following month. "This cannot wait a month," I said. "This is urgent." HOA business is conducted according to a schedule, Mr. Nichols. If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing. This is not a complaint. This is a safety issue. Then you can submit a safety concern in writing, and the board will review it at the next meeting. I took a deep breath. Fine. When is the next board meeting? June 28th at 7 p.m. in the community center. That was 4 weeks away. I hung up and immediately started drafting an email to all 5 board members. I spent 3 hours on it, laying out my findings in clear professional language. I attached photographs of the cracks, charts from my seismograph readings, and maps showing the correlation between our development and the fault line. I cited peer-reviewed geological studies. I provided my credentials. I made it as airtight as possible. I sent the email Friday morning and waited for a response. By Monday, I had received nothing, not even an acknowledgement that they had received my message. I called the HOA office again. Gloria informed me that the board would respond in due course and that I should be patient. "Did they even read it?" I asked. "I do not have access to that information, Mr. Nichols." I decided to take a different approach. I printed out copies of my findings and hand-delivered them to each board member's house. Brenda Patterson lived on Maple Court in a house that was slightly larger than the others, with a 3-car garage and a fountain in the front yard that I was fairly certain violated the HOA's own rules about water features. I rang her doorbell at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, figuring she would be home from whatever it was she did all day. She answered the door wearing white linen pants and a navy blue blouse with those ever-present pearls. Her expression soured the moment she recognized me. "Mr. Nichols, what can I do for you?" "I need to speak with you about a serious safety issue." I held up the folder containing my report. "Did you receive my email last week?" "I received many emails, Mr. Nichols. This one was about geological instability beneath the development. Brenda, I have evidence that Meadowbrook Estates is built on an active fault line." She stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she said, "Mr. Nichols, I appreciate your concern, but I hardly think we need to panic over some cracks in concrete. Houses settle. It happens." "This is not settling. I have seismograph readings showing microseismic activity. There is an active fault running beneath us." "You set up equipment without HOA approval?" I blinked. "What?" "Seismograph equipment. That would require approval from the Architectural Review Committee. You cannot just install monitoring equipment on HOA property without permission." "It is in my backyard, on my property." "Your property is part of the HOA. Any permanent installation requires approval." I felt my jaw clench. "Brenda, did you hear what I just said? Active fault line, earthquake risk. This entire development could be in danger." "I heard you, Mr. Nichols. And I'm telling you that the HOA had this property thoroughly surveyed before construction began. We had engineers, inspectors, the whole 9 yards. If there was a fault line, it would have been discovered then." "What you are suggesting is that you, a retired individual with no connection to this development's construction, somehow know more than the professional engineers who worked on this project. That seems rather unlikely, does it not?" "I'm a geologist. I worked for 30 years. "Retired geologist," she interrupted. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have dinner in the oven. If you want to present your concerns to the board, you are welcome to do so at the June meeting. Good evening." She closed the door in my face. I stood there on her porch for a solid minute, trying to process what had just happened. Then I went to the other 4 board members' houses. 2 of them were not home. One, a man named Gerald Hopkins, who lived on Birch Lane, listened politely for about 30 seconds before telling me he would defer to Brenda's judgment on the matter and closed his door. The fourth, a woman named Susan Morales, seemed more receptive. She invited me in, looked at my data, and frowned. "This does look concerning," she admitted, "but I am not a scientist. I would not know how to interpret this. That is why I am bringing it to your attention. We need to bring in professional seismologists. Get the California Geological Survey involved. Have them do a proper assessment." "That sounds expensive." "It is necessary," she bit her lip. "I will bring it up at our next board meeting. But Mr. Nichols, you should know that Brenda pretty much runs things around here. If she has already made up her mind, it will be hard to change it. People's lives could be at stake. I understand. I will do what I can." I left her house feeling slightly less hopeless, but not by much. Over the next 2 weeks, I continued monitoring seismic activity. The tremors were consistent, small but constant. I started keeping a log, noting the time and intensity of each one. I also started documenting every crack I found in the neighborhood. I took photographs, measured widths, noted locations. I created a comprehensive map showing the pattern of structural damage throughout the development. I also started talking to neighbors. Most people brushed me off. A few listened with mild interest, but did not seem overly concerned. One man, David Chen from Elm Drive, told me he had noticed some cracks in his foundation, but assumed it was normal. When I explained what I had discovered, he went pale. Are you serious? An earthquake fault?" "I am completely serious." "Jesus, what are we supposed to do?" "I'm trying to get the HOA to address it, but they are stonewalling me." "That sounds like them. Brenda Patterson tried to find me last year because my Christmas lights were still up on January 2nd. She said the rules state all holiday decorations must be removed by January 1st. I told her January 1st was a federal holiday and I was not taking down lights on New Year's Day. She did not care. I got a $100 fine. She is more concerned about appearances than actual safety. Can you go over her head? City officials or something? I have been thinking about that. The truth was, I had been thinking about little else. I spent an entire Saturday researching who to contact. I called the San Bernardino County Building and Safety Department and was transferred through 4 different people before reaching someone who said he could help. His name was Mark Reeves, and he was an inspector who handled residential construction issues. I explained the situation to him. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. "Do you have documentation of your findings?" he asked when I finished. "Extensive documentation, seismograph readings, photographs, geological maps, everything. Send it all to me. If what you are saying is accurate, this is a serious violation of building codes. Developments are required to undergo geological surveys before construction begins, specifically to identify fault lines and earthquake risks. If this was missed or ignored, there could be major liability issues. I will send everything today. One more thing, Mr. Nichols. Do not mention to anyone that you have contacted the county. If there is a cover-up involved, and I am not saying there is, but if there is, we do not want to tip anyone off before we have had a chance to investigate." Understood. I sent him everything I had. Then I waited. The June 28th board meeting arrived. I showed up at the community center at 6:45 p.m. with printed copies of my report for each board member and several concerned neighbors I had managed to convince to attend. David Chen was there, along with his wife, Linda. An older couple named Robert and Patricia Zimmerman from Willow Lane came because they had significant foundation cracks in their garage. A younger guy named Jake Foster from my street showed up because he said he liked drama, and this sounded interesting. The community center was a bland, utilitarian building with beige walls and industrial carpet that might have been blue once, but had faded to a grayish purple. Folding chairs were arranged in rows facing a table where the board members sat. Brenda Patterson was in the center, flanked by her 4 colleagues, Gerald Hopkins, Susan Morales, a woman named Kathleen Brennan, and a man named Thomas Wu. Brenda called the meeting to order at precisely 7 p.m. She went through the usual opening procedures, approving the minutes from the last meeting, discussing financial reports, reviewing architectural requests. Someone wanted to install a pergola. Someone else wanted to replace their garage door with one that had windows. Brenda and the board deliberated these matters with the gravity of Supreme Court justices deciding constitutional law. Finally, at 7:45 p.m., Brenda said, We have a resident who requested time to speak. Mr. Arthur Nichols, you have 5 minutes. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I had prepared a presentation, which I had saved on a USB drive and hoped to display on the projector they had set up. But when I asked if I could use it, Brenda said the projector was reserved for official HOA business only. This is official HOA business, I said. No, this is a resident concern. You have 5 minutes to speak. I suggest you use them. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. There were maybe 20 people in attendance, most of them looking bored. My name is Arthur Nichols, and I'm a retired geologist. For the past month, I have been conducting research that has led me to a troubling conclusion. Meadowbrook Estates is built directly on top of an active fault line connected to the San Andreas fault system. That got people's attention. The board expressions shifted to alarm. I have documented microseismic activity beneath this development using professional-grade equipment. I have mapped structural damage throughout the neighborhood that correlates with fault line movement. I have cross-referenced my findings with geological survey data from the California Geological Survey. Everything points to the same conclusion. We are living on an active earthquake fault. Brenda held up her hand. Mr. Nichols, as I told you before, this property was thoroughly surveyed before construction began. You are spreading misinformation. I am presenting scientific data. You are presenting your interpretation of data, and you are not part of the team that worked on this development. You have no access to the actual geological surveys that were conducted. Then show me those surveys. Make them available to the residents. Brenda's expression tightened. Those documents are proprietary. Proprietary? They concern the safety of everyone living here. We have a right to see them. You have a right to live in a community that was built according to all applicable building codes and regulations, which this community was. Your fear-mongering is irresponsible and, frankly, actionable. You are potentially damaging property values with these baseless claims. Baseless? I have seismograph readings. Your 5 minutes are up, Mr. Nichols. I am not finished. Your time is up. Please sit down. David Chen stood up from his seat. I want to hear what he has to say. He can have my time. That is not how this works, Mr. Chen. Then I am making a motion that we extend his time. Susan Morales, the one board member who had seemed sympathetic before, spoke up. I second that motion. Brenda looked furious, but she was bound by parliamentary procedure. Fine. All in favor of extending Mr. Nichols's time? Susan raised her hand. Gerald, Kathleen, and Thomas kept their hands down. The motion failed 3-2. Sit down, Mr. Nichols. This is not over, I said. I have already contacted the county. They are investigating. That was a tactical error. I saw Brenda's eyes flash with something between anger and panic. You did what? I contacted the San Bernardino County Building and Safety Department. They are reviewing my findings. You had no right to do that without bringing it to the board first. I brought it to the board. You refused to listen. Brenda stood up. This meeting is adjourned. Wait, we still have other business? Kathleen Brennan protested. The meeting is adjourned, Brenda repeated, her voice sharp. She gathered her papers and walked out of the room. The other board members looked at each other in confusion, then followed her lead. The residents in attendance started talking among themselves, voices rising in concern and confusion. David Chen came up to me. Well, that went great, he said sarcastically. I should not have mentioned the county investigation. Probably not, but honestly, screw them. If this is real, we deserve to know. It is real. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. I received a formal letter from the HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Steele, whose letterhead listed him as representing over 50 homeowners associations across Southern California. The letter accused me of defamation, harassment, and intentionally attempting to damage property values. It demanded I cease and desist from making any further claims about fault lines or geological instability. It threatened legal action if I did not comply. I called Mark Reeves at the county office. They are trying to shut me up. That's a common reaction when people are hiding something. Do not worry, Mr. Nichols. We are taking your information seriously. I have assigned a team to review everything you sent. We should have preliminary findings within 2 weeks. What happens then? If we determine there is a credible threat, we can order a full geological survey of the property. We can also halt any new construction and potentially require evacuations if the risk is deemed severe enough. Evacuations? You mean people would have to leave their homes? In a worst-case scenario, yes, but let us not get ahead of ourselves. We need to verify your findings first. I followed the attorney's advice in one respect. I stopped talking to neighbors about it, but I did not stop monitoring the seismic activity. If anything, it was increasing. The tremors were getting slightly stronger, not enough for most people to notice, but my equipment picked them up clearly. On July 10th, I got a call from Mark Reeves. "Mr. Nichols, I wanted to give you an update. Our team has reviewed your data and we agree with your assessment. There does appear to be an unmapped fault line beneath Meadowbrook Estates. We are going to send a team out next week to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys and install additional monitoring equipment." Thank you. That is a relief. I should warn you, though, the HOA is not going to be happy about this. They're going to fight us every step of the way. These things tend to get messy. I figured as much. We will need access to multiple properties to do our surveys. We will be issuing notices to residents, and we will also be contacting the HOA board directly. Just be prepared for some blowback. The blowback came swiftly. 3 days later, I received another letter from Richard Steele, this time informing me that the HOA was fining me $10,000 for willful interference with HOA operations and causing material harm to the community. They cited a clause in the CC and Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the neighborhood, which stated that residents could be held financially liable for actions that negatively impacted the community as a whole. I called an attorney of my own, a woman named Jennifer Hartley, who specialized in HOA disputes. She laughed when I read her the letter. "They cannot do that," she said. "That clause is meant for things like running a meth lab in your garage or operating a commercial business that violates zoning laws. It is not meant to punish someone for reporting legitimate safety concerns. If they try to enforce this, we will bury them." What should I do? Nothing. Ignore the letter. If they pursue it, we will respond. In the meantime, focus on helping the county with their investigation. The county team arrived on July 18th. 3 geologists and 2 technicians spent 4 days conducting surveys throughout the neighborhood. They set up ground-penetrating radar equipment, installed additional seismographs, took core samples from multiple locations. Residents watched with growing alarm as the scientists worked. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some people blamed me for bringing the county in and causing all this disruption. Others thanked me for potentially saving their lives. Brenda Patterson went door to door, assuring everyone that this was much ado about nothing, that the county was overreacting, that there was no real danger. She distributed a memo stating that the HOA had complete confidence in the original geological surveys conducted before construction, and that this new investigation was a waste of taxpayer money. On July 22nd, the county team finished their work. Mark Reeves called me that evening. "Mr. Nichols, I am not supposed to share this information before our official report is released, but I thought you should know." You were right. Not only is there a fault line beneath Meadowbrook Estates, but it is more active than you initially thought. We are classifying it as a significant seismic risk. My stomach dropped. How significant? Significant enough that we are recommending immediate action. The county is going to issue a report within 48 hours. It will require the HOA to conduct a full engineering assessment of every structure in the development. Depending on those findings, residents may need to evacuate until retrofitting work can be completed. We are also launching an investigation into how this was missed during the original permitting process. You think it was intentionally covered up? I'm not saying that, but something went very wrong somewhere along the line. The county's report dropped like a bomb on July 24th. It was 8 pages long and concluded with clear, unambiguous language. Meadowbrook Estates had been constructed on an active fault line without proper geological surveys or engineering precautions. All 240 homes were potentially at risk. The county was ordering an immediate engineering assessment and was recommending that residents evacuate to temporary housing until the full extent of the danger could be determined and appropriate remediation measures could be implemented. The neighborhood erupted into chaos. People were terrified, furious, confused. Emergency HOA meetings were called. Residents demanded answers. Brenda Patterson initially tried to maintain her position that everything was fine, but the county's report was too damning. She could not spin her way out of it. A town hall meeting was scheduled for July 27th at the community center. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The energy in the room was electric with anxiety and anger. Brenda stood at the front with the other board members, looking distinctly less composed than usual. Her hair was not as perfectly styled. Her pearls seemed to have lost their luster. "I want to assure everyone that the HOA takes these findings very seriously," she began. "We are working with our attorneys and engineers to—" "You told us we were safe," someone shouted from the crowd. "Yeah, you said the property was surveyed," another voice called out. Brenda held up her hands. "Please, let me speak. We relied on the information provided to us during the development phase. We had no reason to believe—" "Where are the original geological surveys?" I asked, standing up. "You said they existed. Let us see them." Brenda's mouth opened and closed. "Those documents are with our attorney." "That is convenient. Mr. Nichols, you are the one who caused this panic. If you had not gone running to the county with your amateur findings—" "Amateur? I am a professional geologist, and if I had not done my job, people could have died the next time there's a major earthquake." The crowd murmured in agreement. David Chen stood up. "I want to see those original surveys too. In fact, I think we all deserve to see them, if they exist." "They exist," Brenda insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Susan Morales, the board member who had seemed sympathetic to my concerns from the beginning, spoke up. "Brenda, maybe we should just release the documents. If they support what you are saying, it will calm people down." "It is not that simple, Susan. There are legal considerations." "Legal considerations?" someone shouted. "Our houses are sitting on an earthquake fault and you are worried about legal considerations?" The meeting devolved into shouting. Eventually, Brenda adjourned it without providing any real answers. As people filed out, many of them stopped to talk to me. Some thanked me. Others asked what they should do. I told them all the same thing: wait for the engineering assessments and follow the county's recommendations. Over the next week, structural engineers hired by the county inspected every home in Meadowbrook Estates. The findings were grim. 70% of the homes showed signs of stress from fault line movement. Foundation cracks, wall separations, roof damage. Some were minor. Others were serious enough to pose immediate safety risks. The county issued evacuation orders for 38 homes, deemed to be in the highest risk zone, the area where the fault line ran most directly beneath the surface. Residents were given 72 hours to relocate to temporary housing, with the county providing assistance for those who could not afford hotels or rentals. The remaining homes were placed under advisory status, safe for now, but requiring immediate retrofitting work to meet earthquake safety standards. The cost estimates for retrofitting ranged from $30,000 to over $100,000 per home, depending on the extent of work needed. People were devastated. Many had sunk their entire savings into these houses. Now they were facing either evacuation or crushing renovation costs. And everyone wanted to know, who was responsible? That question was about to be answered. On August 3rd, the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office announced they were opening a criminal investigation into the development of Meadowbrook Estates. Specifically, they were looking into whether building permits had been obtained fraudulently, whether required geological surveys had been faked or omitted, and whether anyone involved in the project had knowingly concealed the fault line. The investigation moved quickly. Subpoenas were issued, documents were seized. Within 2 weeks, the picture became clear, and it was ugly. Meadowbrook Estates had been developed by a company called Summit Properties, LLC. During the permitting phase in 2018, the county had indeed required a geological survey before approving construction. Summit Properties had submitted a survey report claiming no significant seismic risks. That report had been prepared by a firm called Western Geotechnical Consulting. When investigators tracked down Western Geotechnical Consulting, they discovered it was a shell company. It had no actual geologists on staff. The report had been fabricated, signed by someone claiming to be a licensed geologist named Dr. Raymond Porter. Dr. Raymond Porter did exist, but he was retired and living in Florida. He had never worked for Western Geotechnical Consulting, and his professional credentials had been stolen and used without his knowledge. Summit Properties had knowingly submitted a fraudulent geological survey to bypass the real inspection that would have revealed the fault line. They had done this because the land had been cheap, precisely because of the seismic risk. No legitimate developer would touch it, but Summit Properties saw an opportunity to make millions if they could just get past the permitting process. They had succeeded. They had built 240 homes on unsafe land, sold them to unsuspecting buyers, and then dissolved the company. The principals behind Summit Properties had walked away with enormous profits. But the HOA board had also been involved. Not all of them, but some. Specifically, Brenda Patterson. It turned out that Brenda had been hired as the HOA president before construction was even complete. She was not just an overbearing busybody who loved enforcing petty rules. She had been deliberately installed by Summit Properties to ensure that no one asked too many questions about the development's foundation. When investigators dug into Brenda's finances, they discovered she had received $250,000 in payments from Summit Properties, routed through various shell companies to obscure the trail. In exchange, she was supposed to suppress any concerns about structural issues, discourage complaints, and generally keep a lid on anything that might expose the fraud. That was why she had fought me so hard. It was not just stubbornness or pride. She had a financial interest in keeping the truth buried. On August 19th, Brenda Patterson was arrested at her home on Maple Court. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, accepting bribes, and criminal negligence. The district attorney also charged 3 executives from Summit Properties, who were tracked down in various states. One was in Colorado, one was in Texas, one was in Nevada. All 3 were arrested and extradited back to California to face charges. The neighborhood watched Brenda's arrest with a mixture of vindication and horror. Some people cheered, others were simply stunned. Gerald Hopkins, one of the other board members, resigned immediately, claiming he had no knowledge of Brenda's involvement with Summit Properties. The county investigation found no evidence he had known, so he was not charged. Susan Morales, Kathleen Brennan, and Thomas Wu were all cleared as well. They had simply been ordinary residents who volunteered for the board, and Brenda had kept them in the dark about everything. The legal aftermath was complex and drawn out. Civil lawsuits were filed. Homeowners sued Summit Properties, but the company had no assets left. They sued the county for failing to catch the fraudulent geological survey, arguing that the permitting office should have done more due diligence. That lawsuit would take years to resolve. A victims' compensation fund was eventually established, pooling money from various insurance claims and settlements. It was not enough to cover all the costs, but it helped. As for the homes themselves, the retrofitting work began in September. Engineers designed reinforcement plans for each property, installing steel bracing, reinforcing foundations, adding shear walls. It was expensive and disruptive, but necessary. The county also implemented an ongoing monitoring program, with seismographs permanently installed throughout the neighborhood to track fault line activity. The 38 homes in the highest risk zone remained evacuated. Eventually, the county determined that those houses would need to be demolished and the land left undeveloped. The residents of those homes were the worst off, losing everything. The compensation fund prioritized them, but many still faced financial ruin. I spent much of that fall helping coordinate relief efforts. I worked with Jennifer Hartley, my attorney, to organize legal clinics where affected residents could get advice. I testified before the County Board of Supervisors about the need for stricter geological survey requirements for future developments. I gave interviews to local news stations explaining the science behind what had happened and advocating for reforms. Brenda Patterson's trial began in February of the following year. I attended several days of it, sitting in the courtroom and watching as prosecutors laid out the evidence against her. She maintained her innocence, claiming she had not known the geological survey was fraudulent, that she had simply been doing her job as HOA president. But the financial records were damning. The $250,000 in payments, the timing of those payments, which corresponded directly with complaints she had suppressed. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Brenda was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. She appealed, but the conviction was upheld. The 3 Summit Properties executives got longer sentences, ranging from 8 to 12 years each, along with orders to pay restitution. Not that the restitution would ever be fully collected. They had hidden most of their money in offshore accounts that investigators could not access. By the spring, life in Meadowbrook Estates had settled into a new normal. Retrofitting work continued. The neighborhood looked like a construction zone, with trucks and equipment everywhere. But people were adapting. Some residents had moved away, unable to deal with the stress and uncertainty. Others stayed, determined to rebuild. I stayed, partly because at my age moving felt like too much effort, partly because I felt a responsibility to see this through. I had been the one who discovered the fault line. I had been the one who pushed for the investigation. I could not just walk away now. David and Linda Chen became good friends. We had dinner together regularly, comparing notes on our respective retrofitting projects and commiserating about the ongoing construction noise. The Zimmermans, Robert and Patricia, also became part of our informal support group. We looked out for each other. The HOA itself underwent major changes. After Brenda's arrest and Gerald's resignation, new board elections were held. Susan Morales became the new president. She instituted reforms, making the board more transparent and accountable. Financial records were made available to all residents. Architectural decisions were opened up to community input. The culture shifted from authoritarian rule enforcement to collaborative problem-solving. In June, almost exactly 1 year after I had first presented my findings to the board, the California Geological Survey released a comprehensive report on the fault line beneath Meadowbrook Estates. They officially named it the Meadowbrook Branch of the San Andreas Fault. The report confirmed everything I had documented and added even more detail. The fault was capable of producing earthquakes up to magnitude 6.5. It was part of a larger network of interconnected faults that posed significant risk to the entire region. The state legislature responded by passing new laws requiring more rigorous geological surveys for all residential developments in California. The law was informally nicknamed the Meadowbrook Act. I was invited to Sacramento for the signing ceremony. The governor shook my hand and thanked me for my diligence in uncovering the fraud that had endangered so many lives. It felt surreal. A year earlier, I had just been a retired guy watering his roses and noticing a crack in his driveway. Now I was standing in the state capitol being lauded as some kind of hero. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had done what anyone with my training should have done: recognize a danger and report it. But I accepted the recognition gracefully. If it meant stricter safety standards and prevented future developments from being built on unsafe land, then it was worth it. By the fall, most of the retrofitting work in Meadowbrook Estates was complete. The neighborhood still had scars. Empty lots where the demolished homes had stood, fresh concrete and new construction materials that had not yet weathered to match the older structures. But it was safe now. Engineers certified that every remaining home met or exceeded earthquake safety standards. Property values, which had plummeted when the fault line was discovered, started to recover. Not to their original levels, but enough that people were not completely underwater on their mortgages. Some residents actually argued that the retrofitting work made their homes more valuable than before, since they were now among the most earthquake-resistant structures in Southern California. I continued monitoring seismic activity. The fault line was still active, of course. You cannot turn off a geological formation, but now we knew it was there. We were prepared. Warning systems were in place. Evacuation plans were established. If a major earthquake did strike, we would be as ready as anyone could be. In December, I received a letter from Dr. Raymond Porter, the real geologist, whose credentials had been stolen by Western Geotechnical Consulting. He was now 92 years old, still living in Florida, and he wanted to thank me for helping bring the people who had misused his name to justice. He wrote that he had spent his entire career trying to promote geological safety, and it pained him that his reputation had been tarnished by fraudsters. My work had helped clear his name. We corresponded a few times. I sent him copies of my research data, and he sent me notes on other potential fault lines he had studied during his career. We talked about the challenges of getting people to take geological risks seriously, especially when those risks were invisible and abstract. He told me to keep fighting the good fight. On New Year's Eve, the neighborhood held a party in the community center. It was the first real celebration we had had since the crisis began. Susan Morales gave a speech thanking everyone for their patience and resilience over the past 18 months. She specifically thanked me for having the courage to speak up when I noticed something was wrong. People applauded. Some came up to shake my hand afterward. A few even apologized for initially thinking I was overreacting or causing trouble. I told them not to worry about it. I understood. When someone tells you your home might collapse in an earthquake, denial is a natural first response. Jake Foster, the young guy from my street who had attended that first contentious board meeting because he liked drama, came up to me with a beer in hand. "You know, Mr. Nichols, when I first heard about this whole thing, I thought you were just some bored old dude looking for attention. But you actually saved lives. That is pretty cool." "Thanks, Jake. Do you think there will be an earthquake? Like, a big one?" "Eventually, probably. That is how fault lines work. But we cannot predict when. Could be next year. Could be 50 years from now. So we are just supposed to live with it hanging over our heads? We live in California. We are all living with it hanging over our heads. At least now you know it is there, and your house is built to handle it. That is more than a lot of people can say." He nodded thoughtfully and wandered off to get another beer. I stayed at the party until midnight, watching my neighbors laugh and talk and slowly let go of some of the fear and stress that had dominated the past year and a half. It felt good. It felt like healing. When I walked home, the streets were quiet. I looked up at the stars, visible despite the light pollution from San Bernardino in the distance. The ground beneath my feet was stable, solid, but I knew what was hidden underneath, miles of rock under unimaginable pressure, slowly grinding against itself, building toward the inevitable release of energy that would shake everything. It was humbling. It reminded me how fragile our human structures really are, how we build our lives on land we do not fully understand. But it also reminded me why I became a geologist in the first place, understanding the earth, respecting its power, and finding ways to live safely on its surface. That had been my life's work. Even in retirement, it turned out I still had one more contribution to make. I reached my house on Oak Circle, number 47, with its hunter green door and its newly reinforced foundation. The crack in the driveway had been repaired during the retrofitting work, filled with fresh concrete. You could still see where it had been if you looked closely, a faint scar running diagonally across the surface. I decided to leave it visible. It served as a reminder that paying attention matters, that asking questions matters, that sometimes one person noticing one small thing can make all the difference. I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in my living room thinking about everything that had happened, the resistance I had faced, the vindication when the truth came out, the arrests, the trials, the slow process of rebuilding and recovery. It had been exhausting. It had been frustrating. There were moments when I regretted ever looking down at my driveway that Tuesday morning, moments when I wished I had just called a concrete repair company and gone on with my life, blissfully ignorant of the geological time bomb we were all living on. But those moments were fleeting, because the alternative, doing nothing, would have been unconscionable. The next major earthquake along the San Andreas system would come eventually. It might be decades away, but it would come. And when it did, dozens or hundreds of people in Meadowbrook Estates would have been at risk if nothing had changed. Now, they had a chance. Their homes were reinforced. They knew the danger. They had emergency plans. They were as prepared as they could be. That was worth all the conflict with Brenda Patterson and the HOA board, worth the legal threats and the community backlash and the months of uncertainty, worth every difficult moment. I finished my tea and went to bed, sleeping more soundly than I had in months. The next morning, New Year's Day, I woke up early and went for a walk around the neighborhood. Construction equipment sat idle for the holiday. The streets were empty and peaceful. I walked past David and Linda's house, past the Zimmerman's place, past the empty lots where homes once stood. I thought about the future of Meadowbrook Estates, about the children who would grow up here, safe in their reinforced homes, taught from an early age about earthquake preparedness, about the new residents who would move in eventually, attracted by the fact that this was one of the safest neighborhoods in the region, specifically because we had faced our geological reality head-on. I thought about Brenda Patterson, sitting in a federal prison, her dreams of controlling a perfect suburban kingdom shattered by her own greed and dishonesty. I wondered if she understood the magnitude of what she had done, or if she still saw herself as the victim of my interference. I thought about Summit Properties and the executives who had prioritized profit over safety, who had gambled with people's lives for money. They would spend years behind bars, but was that enough? Could any punishment truly account for the trauma they had inflicted on hundreds of families? I thought about the system that had failed to catch their fraud, the understaffed permitting office that had rubber stamped a fake geological survey, the lack of oversight that allowed a shell company to operate as a legitimate engineering firm, the reforms that were now being implemented, hopefully preventing future frauds. And I thought about all the retired geologists out there, living in developments across California and the rest of the country, who might notice something odd one day. A crack in their driveway, a strange pattern of foundation damage, unexplained settling. I hoped they would speak up as I had. I hoped they would trust their training and instincts even when faced with resistance, because the earth does not care about property values or HOA regulations or legal threats. The earth moves according to its own ancient rhythms, and we ignore that at our peril. I completed my circuit of the neighborhood and returned home as the sun climbed higher in the January sky. Another year stretched ahead, full of possibilities and uncertainties. The fault line beneath us would continue its slow, inexorable movement. We would continue our lives on top of it, building and loving and working and hoping. That is what humans do. We persist. We adapt. We find ways to thrive even in dangerous places, even on unstable ground. We make mistakes. We learn from them. And we keep going. I sat on my porch and watched the neighborhood slowly wake up. Neighbors emerged to walk their dogs or retrieve their newspapers. Cars started pulling out of driveways. Life continued, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. My phone buzzed. A text from David Chen. "Coffee at my place? Linda made cinnamon rolls." I smiled and texted back, "Be right there." As I walked down the street toward David and Linda's house, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not just satisfaction, though there was that. Not just relief, though there was that too. What I felt was purpose. Retirement had been pleasant but aimless. Golf courses and fishing trips and puttering around the house, it was fine, but it was not meaningful. This, what I had done over the past year and a half, had meaning. I had used my expertise to protect people. I had fought against corruption and won. I had made a real difference. And I realized I did not want to stop. There were other developments out there, other potential dangers that might go unnoticed. There were policy reforms to advocate for, legislative testimony to give, community education to provide. I had decades of knowledge that could still be useful. Maybe retirement did not have to mean the end of my career. Maybe it just meant the beginning of a different phase, one where I worked not for a salary, but for a cause I believed in. I reached David and Linda's house and knocked on the door. Linda answered with a warm smile and the smell of cinnamon wafting out behind her. "Come in, Arthur. Coffee is ready." I stepped inside into the warmth and friendship and simple pleasure of a New Year's Day breakfast with neighbors who had become friends through shared adversity. The fault line was still there beneath us, unchanged and unchanging. But we were different now. We were aware. We were prepared. We were together, and that made all the difference in the world.